on reviewing Naming Adult Autism by James McGrath. So as I was saying, this idea about autistics can only be good at STEM subjects or nothing undermines autistic diversity. And it also creates high expectations that could actually reinforce the disablement of autistics. Because, if an autistic person is assumed to be like really good in STEM subjects and to have talents in that area, and say they struggle with STEM subjects, but there's like this high expectation placed on them that they should be good at these areas, that then kind of increases their sense of exclusion because they're not living up to these expectations. And also the suggestions that autistic people don't get fiction suggest that we are excluded from the audience of an art form which exploits curiosity about autism and influences how others may think of us. So it actually removes the agency from autistic people because autistics are not assumed to be interested in fiction. So because they're not assumed to be interested in fiction, they're assumed then not to be in the audience. They're not assumed to be, they're not assumed to be part of the audience that's in a sense consuming the portrayal of autism, and so they're outside of the dialogue. It's very exploitative, because then obviously autistics then aren't going to be asked, they're not going to be asked to say what they want, say how they want autism to be portrayed, because they're not assumed to be interested in fiction. So it denies agency, it's oppressive. And as I say, these ideas about the differences in social imagination remains conflated with ideas of autistic impairment in all areas of imagination, including intellectual originality and so on, and that this persists throughout life, ignoring the fact that obviously autism is a developmental condition and development itself involves change. So, autistics change throughout life, they don't remain in stasis, they don't remain the same all the way throughout. Even if you struggle with something at one part of your life, you can develop, you can learn. Like I said, my reading comprehension difficulties, I really struggled with that as a kid. Now as an adult, my reading comprehension is a lot better. It's still not great, I still struggle with it, I still have to kind of use Spark Notes to help me understand fiction, but it's a lot better than when I was a kid, and I want to learn, and I want to try and improve myself. So it doesn't mean that you're kind of stuck in this kind of, that you're always not going to understand or whatever, because you do develop. And he mentions the double empathy problem. The double empathy problem, I won't go into it in great detail, but the double empathy problem was actually coined by Damien Milton, who's an autistic sociologist, and its whole idea that non-autistics also struggle with empathy for the autistic experience, and that they actually potentially lack imagination for what it's like to be autistic. The very idea that autistics aren't interested in fiction at all, this very black and white binary, suggests arguably that non-autistics actually struggle with imagination because they cannot comprehend the diversity of autistic experience potentially. And then there's a question mark of whether autistic imagination is dismissed simply because it shows itself differently to non-autistic imagination. Not that autistics lack imagination, just that it's a different imagination. For example, the author himself at nursery school enjoyed playing with toy cars alone, putting the toy cars into a neat line. You could say, yes, on one level, that this was repetitive, but it was how often he saw cars in processions. He often saw cars in procession. So on one level, you could say he was being very literal, like he was just lining the cars up, like he saw them in processions in real life, and that he lacked imagination. But on the other hand, you could see it as sort of a gateway into imagination, because he was kind of copying what he saw in real life. Is that lack of imagination, or is that him trying to kind of like understand the world and from there kind of like imaginatively create, to imaginatively learn from that sort of thing. It's all a matter of perspective, you could say. A bit like me, playing with my dolls when I was a kid and just rehearsing scenes from school and kind of playing on my own with my dolls. Was that lack of imagination because I wasn't playing like some kids played with their dolls and I was just rehearsing scenes from school? Or was that actually helping me to develop my imagination? It's like a matter of perspective. Because so he, in his case, he was seeing and hearing them as if they were actual vehicles. How he imagined them forming a procession down a particular lane, seeing hedges, etc. So yeah, it doesn't matter if it's not like conventional. Is that imagination? Who gets to decide? And also with regards to the pretend play aspect and schizoidea autistics struggle in that area, which again carries a grain of truth, but it also is to do with perspective really and how you interpret the play, because it is true that autistics generally speaking like to play alone, or like struggle to play with other kids. They like often end up playing alone by often again because you're like excluded by other kids as well. There's an element of exclusion, and so you end up playing alone. And nowadays they emphasise this lack of the social element again, the lack of social pretend play, not the lack of such play itself. So in other words, autistics may well be playing creatively and imaginatively, but just not kind of engaging with others or not being able to cooperatively do that very easily. So again, it comes down to the social aspects of it, the social aspect needs to be emphasised. So yeah, he talks a lot about, the othering of autism. His idea that autism is like a sort of a brain-like computer or machine, almost kind of suggesting autistics are a bit like robots, which again is dehumanising, because after all, computers and machines have no rights. They're just here to serve. A bit like a savant serving a typical need for gratification, ? And he talks about, in relation to this, there's a novel called Microserves, which was a 1995 novel, by Douglas Coupland, which I haven't actually read. It's called Microserves, but the character of Carla in it says, I think all tech people are slightly autistic. So again, that kind of results, in a stereotype. And of course, how can you be slightly autistic? You're either autistic or you're not autistic. This book, by the way, was a satire of the Microsoft empire, but it carries one of the main portrayals of all autistics being like, geeks and, that kind of stereotype. But yeah, he says, it trivialises the realities and complexities. This may therefore be what he calls culturally disabling, because it doesn't kind of, it just, suggests that autism is just like a kind of a sort of quirk as opposed to being like a serious condition. So it trivialises realities and complexities of autism. Okay, so I do want to come back to this book next week and I want to touch on some of the other novels he mentions in here, because he quotes he cites a huge array of different novels and TV programmes. I'll only touch on a few of them, like Microserves and ones that I thought were most interesting in terms of how they represent or misrepresent autism, because I just thought this is a really interesting book. So I'll be coming back to this next week. So do let me know what you think about this in the comments box below. Do please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Do please like this video so that other people get to see it on YouTube. And and I very much look forward to speaking to you next week. So thank you for watching.